Nikon brought us out to Florida for a press event for the Nikon Z6, but while I was here, I thought I'd borrow the 200-500 and the new 500mm f/5.6 to see which was a better lens for wildlife photographer, something I'm really passionate about. And Nikon is my favorite platform. The D500 is amazing, especially at that price point, and if you have the budget, the D850 is really the best wildlife camera ever, in my opinion. This 200-500 is a great value at $1,400, and it's what we've been recommending for a long time. But until this 500 f/5.6 came along at $3,500, $3,600, you really had to jump all the way to $11,000, $12,000 to get the very expensive and heavy 500mm f4. So this is a really great compromise, and in fact, it's smaller and lighter than the 200-500 zoom. And that is a big deal because you can now hand hold it much better. You can track moving birds for longer because your arms won't get tired. That means more of you can travel without having to bring a monopod or some other type of camera support. I really, really like a light lens. The only comparable lens is really the Canon 400mm f/5.6, which is very, very old, a little bit shorter, and lacks stabilization. Both these lenses are stabilized. So this lens, the cheaper one, is a zoom. And usually that means it's a lower quality. Like primes of the same focal length are almost always sharper, so it's pretty much a given that this one's sharper. But I did test it, so let's take a look at those shots side by side to see which is sharper.
The 500mm prime is sharper than the zoom, as you'd expect. I'm just showing one sample, but I looked at several hundred to draw this conclusion. With the prime, you can crop deeper and share pictures even when you can't get as close as you'd like. However, you'll always produce better results by using patience and planning to get close to your subject. A patient photographer with the zoom will produce better results than an impatient photographer with the prime. The 200-500 focus is much closer than the prime, which will make a big difference for smaller animals when you can get that close. On the 500mm prime, you need to add an extension tube to get closer. We do that all the time, but it definitely slows you down as you need to add and remove extension tubes to focus at different distances. Note that the 200-500mm shot is getting darker despite using the same settings. That's because all lenses lose light when focusing up close. If I added extension to get the 500mm that close, it would also be darker. Both lenses have image stabilization, but that doesn't mean they're equal. I was able to consistently handhold the zoom at 500mm and 1/100th of a second, a little over 2 stops slower than the reciprocal rule. I couldn't get sharp shots below 1/200th of a second with the prime, which is strange. With still subjects handheld, the zoom will let you shoot a stop slower, either giving you more depth of field or a full stop lower ISO, and that adds more detail and reduces noise by half. Keep in mind, this is the most extreme hand-holding scenario, high magnification with a 45 megapixel camera.
I also tested shooting both of them into the sun to see what the contrast was like, so let's take a look at those side by side.
In high contrast shots, fringing was visible even after automatic software removal, but it wasn't bad, and there's no better option in this price range.
Now, of course, the 200-500 has one really big advantage. It can go all the way to 200mm. If you need to go wider here, you just miss the shot. But the thing is, with wildlife, it's not really a problem that you get too close to animals. You pretty much are always trying to get closer, and if you shoot the 200-500 for wildlife, I bet almost all your pictures are at 500mm. So if you have the budget, the 500mm f/5.6 is the better value, or the better choice anyway. But if you don't, the 200-500 is still good.
The 500mm prime focused noticeably faster than the zoom. I would still pair either lens with a D500 or D850 DSLR, depending on your budget, but the Z6 did an acceptable job of tracking moving subjects like this kingfisher.
How do they each compare to the Sigma and Tamron, say the 150 to 600 lenses? I would definitely prefer to have a name brand lens, not just for Nikon, but for Canon and Sony and every other brand, because I find these third-party lenses just miss focus a lot because the manufacturers don't test the camera bodies with the lenses. They're not officially supported, and in my real-world experience, they just tend to get more shots out of focus, and that can be heart-wrecking when you spend hours, days, weeks, months years out in the field trying to track an animal, and then you get your pictures back and the light was perfect, but everything's just a little bit out of focus. It just missed the eye. So for that reason, I'm sticking to name brand lenses. And at this price point, the 500 f/5.6 is going to open up professional grade wildlife photography to a lot of photographers. Subscribe to see more camera reviews and tutorials, and check out my book, Stunning Digital Photography, specifically Chapter 8, which will teach you all the most important things you need to know about wildlife photography. If you have any follow-up questions about these two, just ask in the comments down below. Bye.